It's an honor for me to introduce our commencement speaker, and I'm especially privileged this year to introduce an accomplished litigator, a fellow native New Yorker, and the Solicitor General of the United States. In his current role, Solicitor General Donald Verrilli has already argued one of the Supreme Court's most highly publicized cases. In the court's landmark decision to uphold the Affordable Care Act, he successfully defended President Obama's signature domestic policy on health care. As I mentioned or alluded to earlier, several members of our graduating class helped draft a brief in support of his argument in that case. Prior to being appointed Solicitor General in 2011, Mr. Verrilli served as Deputy Counsel to President Obama and as an Associate Deputy Attorney General in the U.S. Department of Justice. Before going to work for the federal government, Mr. Verrilli was a partner at Jenner & Block, where he chaired the law firm's telecommunications practice and was co-chair of its appellate and Supreme Court practice. In that role, he argued the Supreme Court case of MGM v. Grokster, a peer-to-peer file sharing case that has set the standard for secondary liability in copyright law in the digital era, and it is featured prominently in my casebook available from Aspen. While in private practice, Mr. Verrilli also maintained an active pro bono practice, most notably in Fifth and Sixth Amendment cases relating to the constitutional right to counsel of death row inmates. He earned his undergraduate degree from Yale University, JD from Columbia Law School, where he served as editor-in-chief of the Columbia Law Review. He was a law clerk to the Honorable J. Skelly Wright of the United States Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit and to the Honorable William J. Brennan, Jr. of the United States Supreme Court. It is indeed my honor to ask you to join me in welcoming U.S. Solicitor General Donald Verrilli.
Dean O'Rourke, distinguished faculty, alumni, proud parents and family, and most importantly, members of the Boston University Law School graduating class of 2013, thank you for inviting me to join you today. It's always a special privilege to be invited to participate in a commencement, but this commencement today in Boston is, for me, as I imagine it may be for you, a moment of special significance. I'm sure that the experience of being here in Boston on Marathon Day and the nerve-wracking days that followed is something you won't soon forget. Your response, and those of your fellow Bostonians, is something all Americans will long remember. As the President said when he was here a few weeks ago, your resolve is the greatest rebuke to those who committed this heinous act of terror. We will long remember the extraordinary image of the first responders, police, firefighters, EMTs, doctors and nurses, and ordinary citizens who rushed towards the explosions, who rushed in to help in those first few seconds of mayhem and chaos. We will remember the extraordinary work of the medical professionals in hospitals who saved the lives of every victim brought to them alive. We will remember the calm and focused determination of the law enforcement officers who brought the perpetrators to justice. And we will remember the inspiring resilience of victims who lost limbs and nonetheless had the grace to say that their lives were actually better now because they understood how much they had to live for. This wonderful city showed its true character. Bostonians showed what they are made of. And that experience holds many lessons. There's one in particular I'd like to focus on this morning because it's apt to this moment as you receive your degrees and begin your careers. And the lesson is this: who you are, what you become, is a product of the choices you make every day along the way. The courage that we saw from the first responders didn't just happen. Many of them are veterans who served our country in conditions of great danger in Iraq and Afghanistan. Because of their experience, their ethic of service, they were ready. The skill, the grace under pressure of the medical professionals didn't just happen. They had trained for a moment like that and they were ready. The exceptional law enforcement work didn't just happen. They too had trained for a moment like that and they were ready. And of course, all of them those who responded on the scene, at the hospitals, those in law enforcement, had chosen a path of service. So when a moment of truth arrived, they had what it took to act in ways that made all of America proud. And there's a connection, and here it is. The profession you are joining today has a lot in common with the profession of those who put themselves on the line on Marathon Day. This is a public profession. You have responsibilities to the public. In fact, there is a public dimension to everything you do as a lawyer. You take other people's gravest problems and you commit yourself to solving them through open and legitimate processes. Your very actions every day express our nation's commitment to the rule of law rather than raw power. You give a voice to those in society who otherwise would have no voice. I hope for many of you at some point in your careers, this ethic of public responsibility leads you to full-fledged public service. It took me more than 20 years to make the choice of public service, and it has been the most rewarding time of my life. And I have to say that I've discovered that the happiest lawyers I know are the ones who have devoted their careers to public service. But wherever you are and whatever you do, you can make huge contributions by devoting your time to pro bono work and public service every year, and you should. When I think of what shaped my career, nothing was more important than the choices I made starting very early on to take on pro bono representation of death row inmates. It was these experiences more than any other that taught me what it means to be a lawyer. For these clients, I was what stood between them and execution. It was my responsibility, even as a young lawyer, to make the judgment calls about what arguments to make and how to make them. It was my responsibility to do the digging needed to make sure those judgments were based on the best information. And it was my responsibility to stand up in court, from the county courthouse in Jackson, Georgia, or Gulfport, Mississippi, to the United States Supreme Court, and give the best argument I could on their behalf. Through those cases, I came to appreciate what it means to be an advocate for a client. And that understanding became the norm for all my work. I also came to appreciate the importance of the principle that every person deserves vigorous advocacy. However reviled the client, or however heinous the crime, and you wouldn't describe all of my clients as gentle souls misplaced inside a jail. The legitimacy of our adversarial system of justice depends on vigorous advocacy. And that legitimacy is most at issue when a defendant faces the most serious consequences. So it was imperative that I give my very best for all those clients, no matter what I thought of them or their actions. And that lesson has infused itself into all my work for all of my clients. That kind of commitment is the essence of what it means for a lawyer to represent a client. I became better at everything I did as a lawyer because of that experience. And I came to understand that at its heart, being an advocate means putting yourself on the line. But there is something even more basic, and Dean O'Rourke just adverted to it. What matters most, and what's ultimately going to shape the lawyer you become, are not the big fork in the road choices. Ultimately, you define yourself by the choices you make every day, no matter where you find yourself. And when you boil it down, that means acting with integrity. It means having the courage to take on the representation of an unpopular client or cause. It means saying a clear no when the law will not permit what your client would like to do, even as you try to find a lawful path to that same end. It means being scrupulously candid with the courts about the law and the facts, even as you are zealously representing your client. It means treating your colleagues, and even more importantly, your adversaries, with decency and respect, and recognizing that even in the slug-it-out world of our adversary system, we're all engaged in common endeavor. Those choices are, of course, going to be important to you as an individual. They are just as important for our profession and for our country. You're going to be society's leaders. You will set the tone. Fidelity to the rule of law and to equal justice under law is a solemn responsibility. It's a solemn responsibility because these ideals are fragile. It is only our faith in them and our willingness to act fearlessly on that faith that sustains them and holds back the corrosive tides of cynicism and distrust. And there's no doubt that there's a good deal of cynicism out there, even among members of our profession. And given the nature of our work as lawyers, you are going to have plenty to feel cynical about. Justice is not always done. Sometimes your best efforts yield nothing. Sometimes people get away with things. And when you experience the frustration of an injustice you cannot make right, it may be tempting to seek comfort behind a protective shell of cynicism and detachment. But you really need to fight that. A cynical attitude only gives the illusion of protection. What it really does is drain the meaning out of the work that you do and corrode your faith in the ideals you came to law school to fight for. By your actions, you can make clear that our system exists not to serve and protect the elites, but to do justice for all. And your actions can help break down public cynicism and nurture public trust. So it's vitally important work that you're about to undertake. One other thing that the Marathon Day experience reminds us of: adversity comes to all of us at some point. You are going to get knocked down. It happens to everyone. But when it does, that is when you truly show what you are made of. And as those brave and dedicated professionals showed us on Marathon Day, what you are made of will be the product of the choices you have made along the way. If you have acted with integrity, you will know how to act with integrity when times get tough. If you have acted with courage, you will know how to summon up courage. If you have shown decency and respect to your colleagues and to your adversaries, you will find that decency and respect reflected back on you. And most importantly, if you've put yourself on the line for something you believe in, the adversity will be worth it. Of course, there's always also going to be plenty of joy, plenty of satisfaction in a job well done, plenty of satisfaction in triumphing against the odds. There are going to be moments like today. And it's in those moments in particular that you should remember the love of family and friends who got you there, and to make sure that you share those great moments with them. And I have one more point that I'd like to make in conclusion, and it's this: do not wait. April 16th, the day after Marathon Day, was the 50th anniversary of Martin Luther King's iconic letter from a Birmingham jail. I'm sure you've all read it at some point. You will recall that Dr. King went to Birmingham in that turbulent year of 1963 to lead nonviolent protests against the racial oppression that was particularly virulent then. Leaders of the Alabama clergy who professed sympathy with Dr. King and his cause nonetheless published a letter criticizing him for pushing for too much, too fast. Dr. King's response distilled what made him the indispensable moral compass of American history. I had an occasion to reread the letter earlier this year, and one passage in particular jumped out at me. I think it's appropriate to this moment, so I'm going to read it to you. In answering the white clergy's plea that he slow down, that he wait for progress in due course, Dr. King wrote this: "Such an attitude stems from the strangely irrational notion that there is something in the very flow of time that will inevitably cure all ills. Actually, time itself is neutral. It can be used either destructively or constructively. Human progress never rolls in on wheels of inevitability. It comes through the tireless efforts of men and women willing to be co-workers with God. And without this hard work, time itself becomes an ally of the forces of social stagnation. We must use time constructively in the knowledge that the time is always ripe to do right. The time is always ripe to do right. That is a call every lawyer should heed. It is a call to put yourself on the line for something that matters, not sometime later, now. It is a call that so many in this great city heeded on Marathon Day, and it is a call that I know you will heed when your moment comes. So thank you again, class of 2013, for inviting me to share this wonderful day with you, and I wish you all the very best.